The full history of Kevin the Cube in Fortnite. Now, Kevin the Cube, you guys, is by far one of the most beloved characters that we've ever seen in Fortnite history. In addition to that, he's also one of the most prevalent. If you guys didn't know, just a little fun fact here, he's the only, I guess, antagonist in Fortnite that has actually came back twice after its death, which is really interesting. I didn't know that. But no matter what time you started playing Fortnite, whether it was Chapter 1 or, you know, maybe even Chapter 5, I think just about everyone knows who Kevin the Cube is and what he means for Fortnite. And Kevin's story actually starts a long time ago, all the way back in August of 2018 in Chapter 1, Season 5. So for some of you, get ready to learn an entirely new era of Fortnite that you've never seen before. And for my OGs out there, get ready for a blast from the past with some new details that you may have actually forgotten. Now, before we actually get into Kevin the Cube, we have to understand why exactly he was here. Now, if you guys remember, all the way back in Chapter 1, Season 4, just one season before Kevin's birth, the Visitor conducted the first ever event in Fortnite called the Rocket Event. And during this event, he attempted to create rifts throughout the island in order to, you know, transfer back to his home place, is what we thought at the time. And in doing this, he created a giant rift in the sky that ended up being called the Sideways Rift. And outside of all the other rifts that he made, you know, popping in and out of the Fortnite map, this one actually stayed, and it was a giant rift in the middle of the sky. And this is pretty much where Kevin the Cube was born from. He appeared first on August 24th of 2018 during Season 5 as a result of the shrinking of this sideways rift that was created by the Visitor in the previous season. Now, it appeared near Paradise Palm and was created from several lightning strikes that came from this giant rift that was closing it in the process. So it was slowly closing, and I remember I really didn't think this was a big deal, but it actually ended up being one of the most like crazy events that we've ever seen in Fortnite, especially being, you know, resulting in Kevin the Cube. Now, every time a bit of lightning would strike this one specific area, which happened to be this random mountain over near Paradise Palms that had a rock and some cactus circling around it. And every time a lightning struck it, it would take down one of these cacti until the last one, which is the one that formed Kevin the Cube, the last lightning strike, destroying the big rock and ultimately spawning Kevin the Cube. Now, it seemed like somebody was actually sending these lightning strikes somewhere from, you know, a different reality or something like that, and that actually turned out to be the case. The faction Last Reality was responsible for this, even though we didn't know that at the time. They were actually sending Kevin the Cube to us through this kind of like, I guess, portal, using this rift and using these lightning strikes as this sideways rift was closing. After Kevin the Cube ultimately did spawn, though, the rift was completely closed and sealed up and was no longer in Fortnite. But what the Last Reality did leave was a terrifying monster that we had no idea what he was going to ultimately do to our map. Now, Kevin the Cube was an object of incredible power. It was capable of destroying objects, literally anything in its path, as it rolled towards Loot Lake, rolling all around the map, printing powerful runes on the ground, which reduced gravity and generated even cube monsters from its fragments, but we will get into a bit more detail on that later on in the video. Now, if you guys don't know, the reason the Cube was so obsessed with getting to Loot Lake is because that was kind of like the bridge between the 0 point and the Fortnite map. And the Last Reality was it was a very malicious faction. They wanted to destroy this reality, and in general, they wanted control over the 0 point, which was the most powerful thing in the universe. Now, I remember when Kevin the Cube first spawned. I remember I was watching a video from Ninja when this happened, and these lightning strikes were going on for a while, and everybody thought that it was just random. There was really nothing to it, but this last lightning strike lasted for around 10 seconds, and in game that seemed like a very, very long time. And I remember when I heard, my friends told me there's a cube over by where that lightning strike was. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, there's a cube, like there's a square on the ground? Like, what do you mean? I had no idea what they were talking about until I actually went up to it and saw it. Now, at first it seemed to be relatively stationary, and it also seemed to be a bit hostile. You could bounce off of it, but after a certain amount of time, I guess Kevin the Cube would get tired of you doing that, and it would kind of send a like mini lightning strike towards you and hit you off of it. But Kevin the Cube did really not want to be messed with. He had a specific goal, and he wasn't going to let anybody get in the way of it. And like I said, initially a lot of people believed that this was just a stationary object, and nobody really knew what was going on with it. However, after a little while, it started to actually like move around the map and would move every hour and 43 minutes approximately. People had no idea exactly where it was going to end up, but as it moved around the map, it printed these 7 runes with like anti-gravity domes surrounding them. And I remember one thing that's very interesting about Kevin the Cube. One time he printed one of these in the middle of like a tournament for money. Fortnite, and people just started like floating all over the place up and down, and it was absolutely insane. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in Fortnite competitive. But throughout the final 3 weeks of season 5, the cube continued to move around the map and also print these mysterious runes on the ground. Now eventually Kevin the Cube did make his way all the way to Loot Lake. His final goal was to eventually get to Loot Lake, with these runes still being very confusing, nobody really knowing exactly what was going on with it. But as it finally like turned one last time, one more revolution, it landed into Loot Lake and actually started like dissolving into the lake and turned Loot Lake into like this kind of like gelatin sort of like material where you would bounce on it. And for the time being, Loot Lake actually was not a terrible place to land because it wasn't as annoying to get across. You guys know how that is in like OG Fortnite and stuff, but this time it was actually bouncy, and I remember this was such a big deal. There were so many people live streaming it, and it was an awesome event to see that happen. Now keep in mind that this happened at the very end of Fortnite season 5, so around I believe it was about September, the late September of 2019, around the 19th or the 20th, when the cube appeared to dissolve, turning the lake into like this purple, like pink, you know, gelatin looking material. And then of course the next season was Fortnite Chapter 1 Season 6, and of course this season revolved around the cube. This was like a completely like Halloween, you know, darkness rises themed season. It was one of my favorite seasons of all time, and it revealed that the cube was actually in fact still intact, and there was more to its, you know, goal than to just dissolve itself and exist within Loot Lake for the rest of its time. It actually kind of rose up, and it was like it consumed itself again from underneath Loot Lake and turned itself into the cube again, and eventually rose in this giant island that took the Loot Lake house along with it, which is what we've seen a lot with Fortnite today. We've seen the floating island many of times, and we also see this kind of like, you know, these islands rifting into Fortnite a lot, which is I think originated mostly from Kevin the Cube. Now this created a large hole in Loot Lake, exposing the bridge to the 0 point with a vortex in the middle of it. And after just 2 days of the island rising, the cube began to move the island to each of these runes it had printed beforehand in season 5. So those mysterious runes that I was talking about before actually did have some type of purpose. It was actually gaining energy from all of these runes, and after it like, and it would take them and actually like pull them out of the ground, like chunks of the land would come out of the ground towards the cube, and it would actually like consume the energy from them and then go on its way to the next one. Now eventually, you guys, as I said, this was kind of a Halloween themed season. On October 24th, 2018, which was the first day of Fortnitemares 2018, the cube exploded the floating island just a little bit into multiple pieces. So it was still kind of like surrounding the cube, but it was in multiple pieces. And as a result of this explosion, the cube fragments that had been placed around the map began growing on the island, which released the cube monsters, which to this day are one of the most hated additions that I've ever seen in Fortnite history. They would attack you, they would randomly spawn in the middle of the Battle Royale map, and they were just really frustrating. Now from October 24th all the way up until November 4th, the cube began to slowly crack. And on November 3rd, just a day before that, it began to drip like this nectar, like whatever was inside of the cube, into the 0 point that was within that hole below Loot Lake, into the 0 point. And until the final drip, which was on November 4th, 2018, the cube started to spin rapidly in this event, which led to a giant white flash, which to this day is one of my most favorite events of all time. I experienced that with one of my friends, and it was so much fun. The cube split apart after the flash, and the players were teleported to the in-between, which was this area between the Battle Royale map and the bridge, something within the 0 point, which was really cool. Now eventually in this event, a rift formed and took the shape of a butterfly, which then multiplied and came to every single person that was, you know, still alive in the match. A cutscene showed up, you know, where the player puts the fly on their finger, the butterfly would land on the finger, and it got teleported back to the map through a rift. Now this was when Loot Lake was no longer Loot Lake, and it was actually a little bit more accessible. It was called Leaky Lake at this point, and it was completely new. The cube monsters were gone, and it seemed like Kevin the Cube had been defeated once for good. Not really understanding what the point of its, like, you know, dripping all of its like stuff into the 0 point was, but that will be seen later on in Fortnite. So at this point, Kevin the Cube has had a very like pandemonious reputation inside of Fortnite. You know, he was this cube that just spawned out of nowhere. Nobody knew why. Remember, we had no idea who the last reality was at this point. It went into Loot Lake and made it all bouncy, then rose above like Loot Lake in this giant like vortex of like, you know, this island with the Loot Lake house, and then spun, blew up the map pretty much, like sent us to this alternate dimension and dripped all of its stuff into the 0 point. It was just very interesting, and we actually did not see Kevin the Cube again until Season X, which is where our story continues. Now, as you guys know, Season X was a really interesting season. It combined all types of different things into one. It was kind of like reality collapsing after the event in Season 9. The monster actually grabbed the 0 point and crushed it in order to save us from the monster in the Monster vs. Mech event. This caused all types of stuff to happen on the island and kind of brought in an alternate timeline version of Kevin, where the floating island was a fusion between the motel POI as well as the Loot Lake house. Now, all type of rifted objects believed to have disappeared or changed places, such as, the Durr Burger tagged by Drift back in Season 5, the Lonely Lodge sign, as well as a bunch of other, all of a sudden came back to the island. Like, these items that were completely missing, nobody knew where they were, all of a sudden decided to come back to the island, suggesting that it was some type of alternate timeline that we were in. Also with the meteor not hitting Dusty Depot and everything, it was pretty clear that we were in some type of alternate timeline. And then in the end event, the island blew up itself, but Kevin itself lived and became the power source of Steamy Stacks in Chapter 2, Season 1. And when it managed to escape Steamy Stacks, it joined the rest of the cubes at the Convergence. We're really exactly sure how Kevin the Cube survived, a completely like reshuffling of the 0 point, but that is really, really interesting and just adds to Kevin the Cube's like insane lore. Like, he has some crazy plot armor in Fortnite. And now we did not see Kevin the Cube again in Fortnite for a very, very long time. Now, we did see him again in Chapter 2, Season 8, I believe, with all of these types of different cubes when the last reality had completely taken over the map and they saw that they had more than one cubes, and the one that we saw in Chapter 1 was just one of them that they sent to us. There was, the golden cubes. There was, I believe, a pink cube at one point too. There was obviously a ton of purple cubes that traveled all over the map doing all types of different things for the last reality and helping them in taking over the Chapter 2 map. And that was an awesome event in, from Season 7 over to Season 8. But after that, we did not see Kevin the Cube for a really long time. Not until Chapter 4, Season OG, when we went back to the original Chapter 1 map, which makes sense. Obviously, Kevin the Cube was back, but this time he really didn't have any purpose in this. You know what I mean? There wasn't anything for him to do, and the 0 point was actually right below him. So he was able to, harvest the energy from the 0 point, which was the point of him doing all of this. But because we were in an alternate timeline, he really didn't have anything to do with it. It really wasn't hostile towards the players or anything. It didn't have enough energy to attack them. And he survived a lot longer than he should have, with, the runes not being around the map, him not being able to, absorb the energy that he placed from them. He really didn't have anything, so he kind of wandered around aimlessly until the end of the season. And unfortunately, you guys, that is all we have for Kevin the Cube. That is the entire story of Kevin the Cube, kind of in a nutshell, in an easy to understand way. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think Kevin the Cube is one of the most iconic characters in Fortnite history? Let me know. I personally love Kevin the Cube. He's one of my favorite antagonists, and I know a lot of people see him as this good guy, but in reality, Kevin the Cube has done really nothing good for the Fortnite island. But let me know what you guys think down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Drop a like on today's video. I mean, you watched all the way to the end of this video. You must have enjoyed, so drop a like. Subscribe to the channel. I make videos like these every single day. Use code PROZEROYT to help support me, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.